A group of firefighters at this national park in northern Spain can be seen taking cover while trying to protect themselves from thick smoke caused by a raging wildfire. In Spain, more than 200,000 acres have burned so far this year. Heat waves have spread across Europe in the past week, fueling the flames. We are also dealing with dangerous heat across the U.S. Rob Marciano tells us when we could see some relief. Guilty on all counts after just under 3 hours of deliberations, a jury reaching a verdict in the case of former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, who was charged with contempt for defying a subpoena from the January 6th House committee, the prison time he could be facing. The verdict came just a day after the January 6th committee outlined its findings on former President Trump's actions during the 187 minutes from the end of his rally speech to when he finally told insurrectionists to leave the Capitol. Two former White House insiders also testified on what they witnessed that day, the impact these accusations could have, including the possibility of federal charges. President Biden's physician saying the commander-in-chief's COVID symptoms have improved. The president does still have a runny nose, fatigue, and an occasional cough, but he's still working by taking calls and attending meetings virtually during his isolation. Mary Bruce is in Washington for us with the latest. An honor decades in the making for a man who broke barriers as the first Afro-Latino baseball player in Major League history. He'll soon be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Even though he crossed a color barrier on the field and off of it, he wasn't even allowed to stay at the same hotel as his white teammates.
Before and after, Dad was never bitter. That was something that I admired so much about him.
And highlighting diversity in America's landscape and in its people. How a best-selling author is using his new nature television series to showcase more than just the beauty of our country. Good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Lipoff in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We witnessed another headline-filled primetime hearing of the January 6th committee last night with new revelations on how much danger former Vice President Pence faced on that day and new footage of former President Trump struggling to say the election was over the day after the Capitol attack. And today in Washington, more fallout from the January 6th investigation as Steve Bannon, the former president's one-time chief strategist, was found guilty of contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the committee. Despite now facing up to 2 years in jail for his failure to testify, Bannon remained defiant outside the courtroom, his attorney saying they will appeal this decision. So, what's next for Bannon, and what message does this send to other witnesses who have refused to cooperate? Here's ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, Steve Bannon's open defiance of a congressional subpoena has ended in a guilty verdict and likely jail time. After just 3 hours of deliberation, a jury in Washington finding Bannon guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for failing to produce a single document and refusing to sit down for a deposition in the January 6th committee's investigation.
We may have lost a battle here today, but we're not going to lose this war.
On the day before the riot, Bannon, a podcaster and former advisor to President Trump, told his listeners all hell is going to break loose.
It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in.
He refused to cooperate with the January 6th committee, claiming executive privilege. But the judge appointed by President Trump did not buy it. After all, it had been 3.5 years since Bannon had worked in the White House. Prosecutors were blunt, arguing Bannon chose allegiance to Donald Trump over compliance with the law. Bannon's team called no witnesses, and he did not take the stand himself. But he was up on the big screen at last night's primetime hearing, the committee playing audio of Bannon from before the election even happened, saying Donald Trump planned to declare victory whether he won or not.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner.
Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas joins me now. Pierre, as we heard Attorney General Merrick Garland say earlier this week, no one is above the law. What kind of message do you think this conviction sends to anyone else who may try to ignore legal subpoenas from Congress?
Well, the bottom line is that you have to take the January 6th committee seriously. In this case, Steve Bannon basically refused to produce a single document, and he did not appear for a deposition. The Justice Department said that was a legal and appropriate subpoena and that he was duty-bound to respond. Otherwise, it was a crime. The jury agreed, and he's possibly going to jail.
All right, Pierre Thomas, thank you. Joining me now for more on this is former chief counsel for the minority of the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Jeff Robbins. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time with us tonight.
Thank you, Phil.
Right off the bat, let's talk about why this case is so important to the rule of law in America.
Well, quite simply, as the prosecutors said, Steve Bannon thought he could thumb his nose at the government, at Congress, at the rule of law, which requires people to show up when they're subpoenaed and not lift a middle finger to them. He thought somehow that it would never come to pass, that he would be prosecuted and convicted and sent to jail. And he has been prosecuted and he has been convicted, and it looks like he is going to jail.
So can Bannon ever be forced to testify? I know he had kind of 11th hour thrown in this idea of testifying before the committee. Most saw that as just kind of a way to get out of what just happened to him. But can he ever be forced to testify? And is it just as simple as taking this verdict and doing whatever jail time comes his way? Because it's most a couple of years, at least maybe 30 days. Is there a chance he faces no jail time at all?
Well, there isn't a chance that he won't get jail time unless, of course, his conviction is overturned along the way. Now, it is pretty likely that his sentencing will be stayed, that is to say his term will be stayed pending appeal, given that it's a misdemeanor. And so he can hope that the process drags out and that something happens in the interim. But if what is expected to occur occurs, which is that he is in fact, his conviction is upheld, he will face a minimum of 30 days in jail and a maximum of 2 years in jail. 2 years because the maximum is 1 year for each act of contempt, and he was convicted on both counts. He can't, to your question, be forced to testify. If he doesn't want to testify, he cannot testify. The problem is he will then go to jail.
Do you think this trial is being used as some sort of warning to other people? Because I want to take a step back now and first let me ask you, how rare is this type of case being brought forward by the Justice Department? And after that, someone like Mark Meadows, who has kind of gone down the same path but hasn't been charged, what happens now because of this?
Yeah, it is pretty rare, to answer your first question, because most people don't have the monumental arrogance that Steve Bannon does, or the fear, as the case may be, of Donald Trump. And in terms of your first question, which is this a message? It is a message. It's a powerful message. And it may very well be that the fact that this has occurred, that Congress did refer this for prosecution, that the DOJ did prosecute and win the conviction, you may very well see a steady flow of people who had been reluctant or otherwise resistant to testifying before the committee now saying, you know what? I don't really feel like spending even 30 years in jail, and the Department of Justice is going to be emboldened to bring these cases. Why don't I just go on down to the committee and answer the questions that I had been reluctant to answer? Why don't I just go down to the committee and produce the documents that I have not been producing? Starting, by the way, with Peter Navarro, who's got a decision to make. I say Peter Navarro because, of course, he's the other person close to Trump who has been indicted for contempt of Congress. So to your point, I think you're absolutely correct. This is a very powerful lever that the committee now has in the 5 or 6 months left of its existence, likely given what's going to happen in Congress, to use to extract testimony to persuade people who were not prepared to tell the truth to now see the light and tell the truth.
Right, pretty cut and dry. At least this one was. I always like to turn a phrase like that. Monumental arrogance. I'm gonna keep. I'll give you credit, but that was a good one. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney Jeff Robbins, thanks so much for your time and your insight tonight. Do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Now to the dramatic new testimony from the January 6th committee hearing last night, where lawmakers insisted that the Capitol riot, as the Capitol riot unfolded, former President Trump did not fail to act. He chose not to act. The testimony also providing chilling new insights into the threat to Vice President Pence, as well as never before seen outtakes from President Trump's recorded message the day after the riot. And tonight in Arizona, Trump and his former vice president are facing off. campaigning for competing candidates. Here's ABC's chief Washington correspondent, John Karl.
Mike Pence was warmly welcomed today by a Republican crowd in Arizona, a day after the January 6th committee showed new evidence of how Donald Trump's actions put his life in danger.
The Secret Service held Vice President Pence.
The committee played for the first time radio dispatches from the Secret Service agents charged with protecting Pence as the Capitol came under attack. You could hear the fear in their voices.
If we lose any more time, we may lose the ability to leave. So if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
An unidentified White House security official testified that the agents feared they could be killed by the pro-Trump mob.
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members.
The committee showed this picture of Donald Trump in the Oval Office, just minutes after he finished his speech before the attack. Several Trump aides described how Trump then watched the violence unfold on television, doing nothing to stop it.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
After more than 3 hours, he finally agreed to tape a message calling on his supporters to go home, but still not condemning the attack.
So go home. We love you. You're very special.
And when Trump spoke, the mob listened.
I'm here delivering the president's message. Donald Trump has asked everybody to go home.
That's our order.
He says go home. He says go home.
24 hours later, Trump still absolutely refused to acknowledge that Biden had won the election.
This election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
Congresswoman Liz Cheney warned the American people that Trump must never be given a chance to do this again.
And every American must consider this. Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
And John Karl joins us now from Washington. John, we heard Congresswoman Liz Cheney challenge her fellow Republicans to stand up to Donald Trump. I'm wondering how that landed and what are top Republicans saying today about it?
Well, Phil, Republican leaders, for the most part, have been entirely silent about last night's hearings. So we reached out today to Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, and to Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House. McCarthy, who the committee described as scared on January 6th. Neither one of them had put out any kind of a statement reacting to the hearing, and neither one of them responded to our questions. Phil.
All right, John Karl tonight. Thank you. Let's bring in ABC political director Rick Klein for more on this. Rick, we learned more about what the president was doing and not doing during the 3 hours the riot unfolded. Is this information having any effect on the former president's relationships with the Republican Party as a whole, or maybe anybody in the Republican Party?
I think the impact on 2024 and on the president's political standing inside his own party is still to be determined. We're seeing in polling some softer numbers for Donald Trump than we've seen basically for the entirety of his post-presidency. We're also seeing some other people start to make noises about running. And I think the hearings have established, if nothing else, an argument to not nominate Donald Trump if you're a Republican. A lot of Republicans that we've heard from through the hearings and elsewhere say they liked a lot of the accomplishments of the Trump administration, but they didn't like how it ended. And they don't like that the former president is still relitigating the past. And I think just the stark display of the inaction, in some cases arguably a dereliction of duty that was put on display by the January 6th committee makes an argument against Donald Trump. And it doesn't mean that it's going to show up and automatically every Trump supporter is going to say we don't like the guy. Obviously, he's got a very strong base, and that is still the case. But I do think it has a cumulative impact that is damaging to his prospects.
Rick, a great example of what you're just talking about is the divide on display today with dueling rallies in Arizona. Vice President Pence, former Vice President Pence, backing one candidate for governor, former President Trump backing another. This isn't the first time this has happened either.
No, and what's notable is that the Trump-backed candidate is someone that denies the legitimacy of the last election. Pence's candidate is someone that's supported by the outgoing governor, who's someone that Trump has been attacking for not trying to overturn the election in Arizona. And that is a familiar dynamic. What to me is a little less familiar and what suggests kind of a new trajectory for the Republican Party that's heading off on two different tracks, maybe three if you include the never-Trump Republicans, people like Liz Cheney. But people like Mike Pence are starting to represent for a lot of Republicans another option that buys into a lot of what Trumpism does, just not the stuff about the lies on the last election. And I think the hearing played that out very dramatically. To hear Republicans provide some of the most damaging testimony possible. Many White House aides who felt just disgust by the fact that even on January 6th, with the lives of members of Congress and Vice President Pence in potential danger, the fact that Donald Trump still was calling his vice president a coward, still was tweeting attacks on him and on other Republicans, still was trying to overturn the election. That, to me, I think, created the split, created the fissure.
The former president has been hinting for a while now that he's going to announce his 2024 candidacy. What kind of position does him doing that sooner than later put not only the January 6th committee in, but the Justice Department as a whole?
Yeah, Phil, I'll tell you, the Justice Department has a longstanding policy of doing everything they can to avoid involvement in political matters. And it doesn't mean if you're a candidate that suddenly you're immune from prosecution, but it does mean it's another complicating factor. And certainly the way that the former president would portray it is this is an attack. He's already said that the January 6th committee is just a get Trump committee to try to stop him from running. He's not entirely wrong if you listen to even what Liz Cheney said at the end of the hearing yesterday. My sense in talking to people around it, Merrick Garland is going on this in a very calculated way, a very careful way. He's going to let the law dictate it, but there's no question that an announcement by Trump would complicate the conversations. We like to think that no one is above the law, that no one's treated any differently. The fact is that really is very hard to do in practice.
Rick, before you go, he's not a politician. We know that. But are there going to be any political ramifications for Steve Bannon now that he's facing prison time and was found guilty today? Because even though he's not a politician, I mean, he was in the mix as close to the president as anybody could have been.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Phil, I think the politics for Steve Bannon are something close to martyrdom. We've seen conferences in recent months where the star attractions are people like Michael Flynn, of course, the national security advisor, who was convicted and then was pardoned by Trump, and Kyle Rittenhouse, even of course, the man who traveled across state lines and was involved in what could have been a racially motivated shooting. So I think being convicted in and of itself might actually make you a bigger political star. That said, I think it's an important victory both politically and in terms of the process for the January 6th committee and for future Congresses to know that someone is going to go to jail for not complying with a congressional subpoena.
All right, and he still has millions of listeners, too, as well. Rick Klein, yeah, it's always good to see you. Thanks so much for the conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now to the White House and news about President Biden's condition since his COVID diagnosis. His physician today releasing a letter saying that his, quote, symptoms have improved after his first full day of taking the antiviral drug Paxlovid. And the White House is stressing now that the president is still putting in a full day's work while isolating in the White House residence. Here's ABC's senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce.
In his first event since testing positive, President Biden with a thumbs up, eager to reassure Americans he's feeling fine.
Let me start by apologizing my voice. I'm feeling much better than I sound.
His voice noticeably deeper, the president at one point reaching for a cough drop. But in a letter, Biden's doctor says his symptoms have improved. He is tolerating treatment well and will continue taking the antiviral drug Paxlovid. Biden still has a runny nose, fatigue, and the occasional loose cough. His oxygen levels are normal. The president did have an elevated temperature last night, 99.4 degrees, which isn't considered a fever. He was given Tylenol, and his temperature has been normal since then.
As you all saw just a few minutes ago, the president is doing better. He slept well last night. He ate his breakfast and lunch. He actually showed me his plate.
The White House today saying it's identified 17 people determined to be close contacts of the president, including members of his senior staff. But so far, none of them have tested positive. At 79 years old, the president is at a greater risk for more severe illness from the virus. COVID response coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha crediting his mild symptoms to the fact that Biden is fully vaccinated and double boosted. The White House reminding Americans they have the same tools.
We are now at a point, I believe, where we can prevent nearly every COVID death in America. That is a remarkable fact.
Mary Bruce joins us now from the White House tonight. Mary, the president says he's feeling better. That is good. But is there any change in the timeline for his possible return to the West Wing?
Well, Phil, per CDC guidelines, the president has another 4 full days of isolation through next Tuesday. He will then be tested again. But the White House is going beyond the CDC recommendations and says he won't return here to the Oval Office. He won't resume his normal activities until he has a negative antigen test. And we both know that could take a bit more time.
Indeed. I want to get back to one thing you asked in the briefing today, Mary, if that's okay. You asked when Americans under 50 could be eligible for a second booster dose. I know a lot of people looking forward to that. What was the response?
Yeah, I pressed the White House on when all Americans, those under 50, will be able to get that second booster like the president has had. And Dr. Jha told me it depends on the FDA. They are still reviewing this. But tonight we've learned that the administration may actually hold off on this decision until the fall, when new vaccines that may provide better protection against these new variants are expected to become available. Phil?
All right, Mary Bruce from the White House. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we are in the dog days of summer, and the minute you step outside, you feel it almost immediately. Extreme heat has hit much of the country, but the end could be in sight for some places. Rob Marciano tracking it all for us. Rob, it is hot.
It is, Phil, and you know, some people are getting pockets of relief, maybe a pop-up thunderstorm, but it's pretty much temporary, and we've got a long summer still to go. It will be drier across the Northeast or the East Coast tomorrow as far as humidity is concerned, but it's still going to be hot, and the humidity is not going away for long. Let's take a look at the advisories that are up and the numbers that we expect tomorrow afternoon. 100 degrees expected in D.C., 107 in St. Louis. Look at all the advisories across the midsection. We're talking like 24 states here, and those excessive heat warnings across the Southwest, they've been up all week. Might see some records broken again tomorrow, but the humidity is going to be increasing along the I-95 corridor. Sunday afternoon, heat warnings have been posted by the Philadelphia National Weather Service. 105, the heat index there. It'll feel like 100 in New York, as far north as Manchester, New Hampshire as well. And similar numbers, I think, for Monday, although it'll be more cloudy. That's when the cool front arrives late in the day on Monday. But if we hit 90 degrees in New York City, that will be the 7th consecutive day in the 90s, and we haven't seen that sort of stretch of a heat wave in nearly a decade. Threat for severe weather tomorrow, and fueled in part by some of the sheets, going to be across the upper Midwest and the western Great Lakes, in a place where it really had a threat about a month ago of tornadoes, damaging winds, and a few tornadoes possible. La Crosse, Madison, maybe the edge of Milwaukee come tomorrow afternoon. Try to stay cool, Phil. Back to you.
Tough thing to do these days. Rob, thanks so much.
You bet.
It's being called a beacon of hope in the war in Ukraine. Russia has agreed to allow tons of Ukrainian grain to ship out. And for the first time, the Pentagon is exploring the possibility of sending fighter jets to Ukraine. ABC senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell is in Ukraine for us tonight. Ian.
Phil, this is a major breakthrough deal in the midst of a global hunger crisis. It's going to lift the Russian blockade of more than 20 million tons of grain that's stuck in Ukrainian Black Sea ports. Now, Russia and Ukraine both signing, but not together. This was essentially brokered by the United Nations and Turkey. Aid agencies are saying that millions are facing starvation around the world. The UN calls this a beacon of hope, but it's going to take 2 weeks to implement and is going to be difficult to carry out. Remember, these waters are heavily mined, so you're going to have pilot vessels that guide those Ukrainian ships that are carrying the grain through those heavily mined waters. And some aid agencies are warning even when it gets out safely to those ports around the world, it isn't going to stop the slide to famine in some countries. Also tonight, the White House confirming that the Pentagon is making preliminary explorations about potentially providing fighter aircraft to Ukraine. Now, if that goes ahead, it's going to be a significant change, and it would undoubtedly be seen as a major further provocation by Russia. Phil?
All right, Ian Pannell, thank you for us tonight in Ukraine. Now to that scary moment back here at home for Republican candidate for governor of New York. Congressman Lee Zeldin was speaking to a small group of people when a man climbed up on stage and tried to attack him. Here's ABC's Andrew Dimbert.
Tonight, that terrifying moment on the campaign trail.
And this is our last stand for New York.
Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin giving a speech outside Rochester, New York, when a man rushes the stage. The attacker heard saying, "You're done," wrestled to the ground. Zeldin was not hurt and was back on the trail today.
The first thing I saw was that he was wearing a hat that says he was a veteran. But at the same exact time, I noticed he had a weapon in his hand.
Investigators tell ABC News the suspect, 43-year-old David Jacobonis, is an Army vet who receives treatment for alcohol abuse and anxiety. The weapon, described as a hard, sharp plastic self-defense tool worn on the knuckles. Zeldin, an Army Reserve lieutenant colonel, is a staunch ally of former President Trump and is running for governor of New York. His opponent, Kathy Hochul, condemning the attack. And President Biden in a statement saying the incident, quote, defies our fundamental democratic values.
Andrew Dimbert, thank you for that. And when we come back, you may remember this video showing a man who saved 5 children from a burning home. The family now describing the terrifying moments before he came to their rescue. Police are calling it an ambush. An officer shot and killed, another injured. The action officials had just taken hours before to try to tackle gun violence. And a disturbing discovery leads a mother to call the police on her own son. The attack she believed he was planning.
With the bombshell hearings over, what happens next? Sunday, exclusive new reports, explosive allegations. Will Trump be charged? Plus, the president and COVID, what you need to know. And Al Gore warned us about this. Now he's one-on-one with This Week, Sunday on ABC.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
The hottest views in daytime are happening right here.
We talk about things on this show that people don't talk about.
That I can't wait to see. Honest takes from strong women.
We need all hands on deck, and we need it right now.
This is the time to speak out. Unafraid to get real.
We stick by our points of view.
We're all seeing it differently, and that's the beauty of The View.
And that's why the most watched #1 daytime talk show is The View. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
America is being poisoned with fentanyl, and we don't even know it.
Just heard my wife screaming. She told me they had just died.
50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
Keep breathing, come on. It's poison, it's pure poison.
A few grains of salt worth of fentanyl will kill you.
Just my agency has seized enough to kill the entire country.
ABC News Live presents Poisoned, America's Fentanyl Crisis. The powerful series, streaming free on ABC News Live. Take America's #1 news with you, anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now. America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you, anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Welcome back. After any mass shooting, we often asked, how were the warning signs missed? Why did no one speak up? Well, this is the story of one mom who did speak up, turned her son in when she saw signs he was planning an attack on his school. Our TJ Holmes sat down with the mother who was forced to make a tragic choice.
And he told me, if I do this interview today, I will not talk to you for a very, very long time. If there's a possibility to save even one person, one child, I think it's worth it.
But as you sit here, there's not a day that goes by that you regret what you did in calling police on him.
No, I don't regret it, because I believe I saved lives.
Nicole Schubert called the cops on her son after she says she found his journal detailing plans of a horrific killing spree that was to begin at home.
It was very descriptive. It was just heartbreaking. I didn't really want to know the details.
One of the things he wrote, if I have this right, is that he wanted to kill his mom, you. What's it like for a mother to read something like that?
Devastating. That's my child. I gave birth to him, you know. It hurts a lot. It still hurts. He says that it was just a story, but I don't know how.
Schubert says she was cleaning her home in 2019 when she came across her son's notebook. She says he described how he'd kill her, then attack his high school in Washington State, where he was a 17-year-old senior at the time. Schubert says she didn't debate long about what to do, calling police just hours later.
Your first instinct is, as a parent, is to protect your child. But at that point, I felt like if he is actually going to do these things, he would be safer in jail.
You were thinking of protecting maybe your own child, but your thoughts had to be on a lot of other children.
Well, the school, I have a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends that have children there. It wasn't just about me and him at that point. It was about a whole school. Hundreds of people, hundreds of children.
Schubert turned over the notebook and told law enforcement she'd also previously found what she believed were the makings of a homemade pipe bomb in her son's room. He was arrested, pled guilty to a felony charge of threatening to bomb or injure property and misdemeanors for harassment. He completed a rehabilitation program, community service, and underwent a mental evaluation. Now, in the wake of recent mass shootings and attention on missed warning signs, Schubert wants to appeal to parents.
Stay in their business. Even if they don't like it, they're not going to like it. But as parents, it's our job to know what our kids are doing. Just be aware and watch for signs. Kids will normally tell you by their actions when something is wrong.
Do you believe parents should be held responsible in some cases for what their kids do in these mass shootings?
Yeah, to a certain point, yeah. I think parents are responsible. Yes, most definitely. Obviously, we can't control our children's actions all the time. Who can? But there's signs that, you know, something's not right. Something's, you know, why is he acting weird? Why is he so to himself? I was in his room, you know, what are you doing? Where are you going? All the time. And he hated it, but he's alive. And everyone's alive, and he's not in jail.
She says her son has not had any trouble with the law ever since. He's working and wants to go to college.
You just pray. You just pray that God helps him make the right choices through life. Because what else can you do? He's over 18 now. He's my child. I love him unconditionally. I'll always be there for him. I'll always love him, no matter what he does.
TJ, thank you for that. Schubert says the family did not have guns in the house. She didn't know of her son having any access to guns. She says to this day, her son contends that what he was writing in that notebook was just a matter of fantasy and not a real plan. Still ahead here on Prime, a woman beaten to death while on her honeymoon, who police are charging now with her murder. Shocking images appear to show a vital source of water out west shrinking. The dire consequences if officials don't act soon. A dangerous and deadly heat wave sweeping across the U.S. We take a look at just how high the temperatures are rising by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day. Even with the new Webb telescope operational, the Hubble is still delivering stunning photos of the cosmos, including this new one today.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
How cute.
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
We're along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
America is being poisoned with fentanyl, and we don't even know it.
Just heard my wife screaming. She told me they had just died.
50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
Keep breathing, come on. It's poison, it's pure poison.
A few grains of salt worth of fentanyl will kill you.
Just my agency has seized enough to kill the entire country.
ABC News Live presents Poisoned, America's Fentanyl Crisis. The powerful series, streaming free on ABC News Live.
These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.
While others are recapping yesterday's headlines,
We're bringing you the right now.
This is the busy border crossing. Steel barricades, another strike.
The Right Now look at the day ahead, how it affects you and your family.
Record high gas prices.
The threat of cyber warfare.
Is peace possible?
World News Now beginning at 2 a.m. Eastern, followed by America This Morning,
America's #1 early morning news.
streaming here on ABC News Live.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
As of today, in a big way, we have inaugurated abcnews.com.
A lot has changed in our world since Peter made that announcement. But what hasn't changed is the commitment to groundbreaking reporting and innovation at abcnews.com. And here's to everything ahead.
Be up around 108 to 109 and the record high as it stands.
So triple-digit heat looks like it's going nowhere in the foreseeable future.
Higher, you're looking at a lot of actual air temperatures around 112, 114. And it's not just...
So it's everywhere, and by now you probably noticed that it is hot outside, but just how hot and when might it end? We gathered the details by the numbers. More than 94 million Americans sweltering under the heat wave blanketing the country today. 28 states from California to New Hampshire are on alert for the extreme heat. 19 days out of the last 21 have been over 100 degrees in Austin, Texas alone. And as the heat takes hold of the Midwest and the Northeast, 85% of Americans will spend this weekend in above 90-degree weather. The heat index will be around 100 degrees from Washington, D.C. to Boston on Sunday, with Philadelphia and Baltimore feeling more like 104. It could be record-breaking temperatures all across the region. Relief won't come to the Northeast until early next week. In New York, it has been 9 years since a heat wave lasted this long. Folks in the Midwest and Northeast may get some relief starting about Tuesday, but this intense heat is expected to move into the Pacific Northwest. We still have a lot to get to here on Prime. Long waits leading to lines stretching for miles at a port in the UK. Why is France being blamed for this chaos? Honoring a baseball legend, how the first Afro-Latino player is being remembered for more than just what he did on the field. And embracing the great outdoors, how is a show using America's landscapes to highlight diversity and culture? But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
So much at stake in our world right now. We wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
and thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
This season, we're taking it up a level.
I'm teaching my guests survival skills. Then they need to face the wild alone.
I'm sure if he's asking me to do it, I can do it, right?
Running Wild with Bear Grylls, Monday at 9 on National Geographic.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
Hey, my wife has fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
After hours of deliberations, the jury in the trial against Steve Bannon reaching a decision, finding him guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress. Bannon, who served as former President Donald Trump's chief strategist before leaving the White House in August of 2017, was on trial for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Just hours before the verdict, Bannon's legal team giving their closing argument, telling the jury the government's case should give you pause and that the case against Bannon is a rush to judgment. Throughout the trial, his defense maintained that Bannon didn't comply with the subpoena because he believed negotiations with the committee were ongoing. But the government, in their closing argument, telling jurors that Bannon chose allegiance to Trump over the law.
Top Trump advisors, lifelong Republicans, telling the January 6th committee as the Capitol was under siege and the peaceful transfer of power at risk, they pleaded with former President Donald Trump to tell his supporters to go home. The committee also hearing from 2 White House staffers who resigned in the insurrection's aftermath. Phone records and witness statements obtained by the committee show the then commander-in-chief never called for law enforcement or military help, instead calling Republican senators to lobby them to stall the Electoral College certification while the mob was storming the Capitol. The committee playing radio traffic from anxious Secret Service members in Vice President Mike Pence's detail as rioters threatened to hang him.
The White House says it's business as usual for President Biden as he battles COVID-19 in isolation. Seen here in this new photo, masked up and on the phone with his national security team today. The president's physician says he did have a temperature of 99.4 Thursday night, but has remained normal since taking Tylenol. Biden still has a runny nose, fatigue, and an occasional loose cough, but his medical team says his symptoms have improved since testing positive Thursday morning. He'll have to work in isolation for 5 full days and get a negative test result before returning to work in person.
Police in Rochester, New York have arrested a suspect in the fatal shooting of a police officer in an ambush Thursday night.
Officer Anthony Mazurkowicz dying at a hospital. A second officer and a bystander shot and wounded.
The shooting coming just hours after the mayor declared a state of emergency due to gun violence.
We are seeing over and over again blatant disregard for life.
A luxury vacation turned nightmare for two American newlyweds. 36-year-old Christy Chen found dead in her Fiji hotel room. Her new husband, 38-year-old Bradley Dawson, now charged in her murder. Fiji police tell ABC News a resort housekeeper discovered Chen's body lying on the floor of her hotel room earlier this month. The housekeeper alerted hotel management, a medical team later pronouncing Chen dead. According to police, Dawson fled the scene and was found days later in the city of Nandi, where he was taken into custody.
An Indiana man and the family he heroically saved from a house fire now speaking out about the incident.
Nick Bostic just happened to be driving by.
There's adrenaline. I hightailed my butt into the house, going through the around the side of it, through the back of the door.
David and Tiara Barrett were on a date night when he got the call from his 18-year-old daughter, Sienna. The house was on fire, with all four of their kids and their friend inside.
We started running down the stairs, and that's when we saw Nick, and we just couldn't find Kaylani.
Bostic helped them out the door before searching for 6-year-old Kaylani.
God uses the most unlikely characters. He sent an angel.
And we are tracking several headlines around the world as well right now. Truck drivers in Britain's heading off on holiday by ferry faced hours-long waits at an English Channel port. British officials are blaming France's border check process and say there hasn't been sufficient staffing. Millions of people in Britain are beginning vacations this weekend, which is the start of the summer school holidays. Clashes between competing militias in Libya's capital killed at least 13 people. This is the latest escalation threatening the relative peace after nearly a decade of civil war in Libya, where two rival authorities are locked in a political stalemate. Officials say 12-year-old was among the dead and at least 30 others were wounded. How would you like to drive on this stretch of road? That's a road many drivers were eager to get onto this mountain border pass between Chile and Argentina. After it reopened, it was closed for 2 weeks after heavy snowfall in the Andes. Thousands of drivers were stranded, leading to backups on the widening road. Turning now to the great American outdoors. What if you could be transported to the outdoors from the comfort of your own couch? Sounds nice. Our next guest, Baratunde Thurston, does all the work for us. The author and podcaster is the host of a new 6-part PBS series, America Outdoors, celebrating the beauty of nature and our connection to it. Take a look.
My name is Baratunde Thurston. I'm a writer, activist, sometimes comedian, and I'm all about exploring the issues that shape us as Americans. This country is wild, and its natural landscapes are as diverse as its people.
Hey! There it is, there it is.
How does our relationship with the outdoors define us, as individuals and as a nation?
Baratunde, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really do appreciate it.
I appreciate being here, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Let's go back to your childhood. Talk to us a little bit about how your childhood influenced your career choice and your creation of this particular series.
I was born in Washington, D.C., 1977, and raised in a Mount Pleasant neighborhood here in this swampy town, and the outdoors was an escape. My mother put me out there. Sometimes she'd just say, go outside and don't come back, or make sure you're back before the street lights come on. But given what D.C. was going through in the 80s, going out into nature was quite a mental health break, was quite an improvement in safety at sometimes. It was quite just a fun place to hang with friends. So she was a Sierra Club member. We went hiking. We went on big bike trips, and also reminded me that the world is so much bigger than the block I grew up on.
There are nature shows out there. No doubt you've been a fan of them and watched them. But in what ways is America Outdoors different from those shows?
I think the main way, Phil, is that we're focused actually on people and our connection to nature and our connection to each other through nature. But primarily, I'm talking to folks who have a really diverse set of connections. I'm talking about the oldest people on this land, the indigenous communities, to the newest, even refugee teenager communities, and everyone in between, ranchers and boatmen and surfers and hikers. And sometimes they don't look like the image of an outdoors person that many of us were raised to expect. And that's part of the surprise and a lot of the joy of the show.
I think in general there's an understanding of why representation is important, period. But why do you think it's important to see people of color representing diversity from these various environments that you go to?
Well, I think many of us carry an extra level of stress because of the stresses in the political environment, the social environment, the economic environment, and we have forgotten, sometimes intentionally, been made to forget that a connection with nature can help reduce that stress, that we have a physical and spiritual claim on this land in a way that goes beyond economic exploitation and goes to a level of community, of joy, of connectedness, in a way that also hopes will make it personal for us to preserve our home planet. Like, Phil, I love Earth. I'm on record as a fan of this planet. It's the only planet I want to be living on. But if I have a deep connection with my stream, with my lake, with my river, with my caves, with my surf, I'm going to want to preserve that. And I got to travel all over this country and find people claiming their landscapes and their outdoor experiences in the way many of us claim our sports teams. And they're rooting for them, and they're defending them, and they're advocating for them. And that was a joyful climate message as opposed to just a doom and gloom climate message.
You mentioned climate. We're seeing record-breaking heat across the country right now. While traveling through America's outdoors, how is the issue of climate change addressed and experienced throughout your series?
It's experienced by everyone. I mean, it's experienced by me and the crew. Everywhere we went, there was an element of climate awareness. There's also a sense of mourning and loss amongst very different communities, from Tangier Island out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay that's literally being subsumed by the water, mourning their loss of ritual and connection with their kids, from their grandparents onto their grandkids, to the Shoshone-Bannock people in Idaho, mourning the loss of who they consider family, the salmon, who we were supposed to witness a salmon hunt, that they actually had to call off the hunt because there weren't enough salmon, and those that remained were basically cooked by the river they were in. They were too weak to want to remove from the water. There's regenerative farming communities that we came across in Appalachia and in northern Minnesota, a little town called Finland. And we don't generally hear stories out of places like Appalachia that involve words like regenerative. So there's a lot of examples of the things we need to be doing at a much larger scale, but told at a very human scale, that are positive, that are joyful, that are still difficult, but that are things that we can really wrap our heads around and replicate through a show like this.
So I recognize that this is a difficult question, but if you have one favorite location that you visited during this series, what would it be and why?
I do not like this question, Phil. I've been asked it before. You'd think I'd be better by now. I feel like you're putting me on the presidential debate stage, asking me to pick my favorite state. I love all my states. All the
We've got to ask
people.
These tough questions, Baratunde.
But here's, since you're going for the jugular, right. I'll represent the Great Dismal Swamp. This is a patch of land that borders southern Virginia and northern North Carolina. It used to be massive during the founding of this country. This was a refuge for people fleeing the slave economy. It was a place that George Washington and his crew called Great Dismal because they couldn't fully tame it, and they thought there were monsters there. And it was actually more free for people fleeing an enslaved system than the world beyond. It was a big stop on the Underground Railroad, and I got to revisit one of the islands that these people seeking freedom settled on, which they could only do because indigenous communities had lived there for thousands of years before, almost leaving the table set for others seeking freedom.
What an exciting job and a beautiful message you bring along with it. Baratunde Thurston, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You can watch Baratunde's show, America Outdoors, on PBS.
Thanks, Phil.
And finally tonight, a long overdue honor for a barrier-breaking baseball player. Alex Perez with the story.
Long before baseball giants like slugger Juan Soto, shortstop Francisco Lindor, or right fielder Ronald Acuna Jr. became stars of the game, there was third baseman Minnie Miñoso, the very first Afro-Latino in Major League Baseball history. As the color barrier fell, he joined the Cleveland Indians in 1949 and was the very first black player to bat for the Chicago White Sox in 1951, a relationship that would last more than 60 years.
May 1st, 1951, his first at-bat, he hits a home run.
And moments before that, he was being called every name in the book, every slur imaginable.
Even though his extraordinary talent spoke for itself, his son, Charlie Rice Miñoso, points out it was the color of his skin that became the focus. His older brother would sometimes travel with their dad.
He would often say how they'd have to stay at different hotels as Dad's white teammates. the death threats that sometimes he would receive, the names that he would be called.
Overt racism and discrimination were the norm when Miñoso debuted with the White Sox.
Not only was he facing the same discrimination that other dark-skinned players were, he also was trying to navigate some of those, just his immigrant story. He was still trying to navigate life in a new country, life in a new culture.
A story that started in his native Cuba, where he was born Saturnino Orestes Armas Miñoso Arrieta, playing professional baseball on the Caribbean island before moving to the Negro Leagues, where he played for the New York Cubans, and simplified his name, fashioning his new first name, Minnie, out of his last name. He died in 2015, but now, more than 71 years since that first home run with the White Sox, Minnie Miñoso's storied career, including 9 All-Star games, 3 Gold Glove titles, and often hitting over 300, will live forever in Cooperstown when he's inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame this weekend. His son will be right there.
What's the bitter part? What's the sweet part?
The sweet part is that Dad's legacy is going to be enshrined among some of baseball's greatest players. The bitter part is that he's not here to enjoy it himself. It was one of his life's dreams, if not his life dream.
A life dream that Mr. White Sox, as some called him, never got to realize, overlooked by the Hall of Fame for decades.
But each time, he always seemed positive about it.
Before and after. Dad was never bitter. That was something that I admired so much about him.
If you only count, as they did in the past, it's the statistics for Major League Baseball only playing in the National or American League like we do today, then Minnie Miñoso doesn't get to 2,000 hits. So it's really interesting that, including those 3 years of Negro Leagues, gave him, put him over that threshold of 2,000. Also got his batting average to a high, 299. And we are now finally recognizing all those Black and Afro-Latino athletes, right? And those African-American athletes that were never recognized for their hard work and their major league performances in all those years.
But Miñoso was never deterred, continuing his work on the field and off, even after retirement, mentoring countless players and advocating for a number of charities and causes.
I had the privilege, honor of interviewing your father years ago, and I remember walking away thinking, not only is he talented, but also so inspirational, such sort of goodwill and just positivity was just coming out of him.
And I'm so happy so many things happen in my life.
Is that the way he was all the time?
He loved life, he loved people.
And the communities Miñoso helped build loved him back. At White Sox Ballpark, his retired number 9, this life-size bronze statue.
Give him a quick bear hug.
Aww.
From small portraits to massive ones, Miñoso's legacy in this park and at home remains strong.
He was a Hall of Fame dad. He was just a Hall of Fame person.
And now, finally, a Hall of Fame player.
A spectacular life and legacy. Alex, thank you for that. Before we go tonight, the image of the day. A very cool birthday for this giant panda at the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Mei Zhang celebrated her 24th birthday with this chili ice cake. This year, the zoo is marking 50 years since the first giant pandas came to D.C. Looks good. That's our show for this hour. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Phil Lipoff. Thanks for streaming with us.
America's #1 news, ABC.